Sarah Martinez walked into the police academy's shooting range on her first day, her heart pounding with nervous excitement. The smell of gunpowder and cleaning oil filled the air as she surveyed the long corridor lined with targets. 20 other recruits were already there, most of them men who looked like they had been handling firearms since childhood. She had dreamed of becoming a police officer since she was 12 years old, inspired by her father, who served as a detective for 30 years. But growing up in a household where her mother insisted on traditional feminine pursuits, Sarah had never touched a gun before entering the academy. While her classmates talked casually about hunting trips and weekend shooting practice, she quietly worried about this crucial part of her training. The instructor, Sergeant Thompson, was a stern man with graying hair and piercing blue eyes. He had trained hundreds of recruits over his 20-year career and could spot natural shooters within minutes. As he explained the basics of firearm safety and proper stance, Sarah listened intently, taking mental notes of every detail. When it came time for the first shooting exercise, Sarah's hands trembled slightly as she picked up the service pistol. The weight felt foreign in her grip, much heavier than she had imagined. She positioned herself at lane 15, sandwiched between two male recruits who seemed completely at ease with their weapons. The first round of shots echoed through the range like thunder. Sarah squeezed the trigger carefully, trying to remember everything the sergeant had taught them about breathing and sight alignment. When the targets were brought forward for inspection, her heart sank. While most recruits had hit the target somewhere near the center rings, her shots were scattered wildly across the paper, with two missing the target entirely. Marcus Chen, the recruit to her left, glanced at her target and smirked. "Looks like someone's never seen a gun before," he whispered loud enough for others to hear. A few nearby recruits chuckled, and Sarah felt her cheeks burn with embarrassment. During the lunch break, the whispers followed her to the cafeteria. She overheard comments about how some people weren't cut out for police work, and suggestions that she might be better suited for desk duty. The doubt that had been lurking in the back of her mind began to grow stronger. That evening, Sarah sat in her small apartment, staring at the academy handbook. She read the firearms requirements again and again, knowing that failing this component would end her dream before it truly began. Her father called, as he did every night, asking about her progress. She forced enthusiasm into her voice, not wanting to disappoint him with tales of her struggles. The next morning brought another shooting session, and Sarah's performance showed little improvement. Her shots remained erratic, and her confidence continued to crumble with each missed target. Sergeant Thompson approached her during a break, his expression unreadable. "Martinez, I've seen recruits struggle before, but you need to find your focus quickly. The academy isn't going to lower standards for anyone," he said bluntly. "You've got natural instincts for law enforcement, but if you can't handle a firearm safely and accurately, you won't graduate." That afternoon, as Sarah packed her gear after another disappointing session, she noticed several recruits huddled together, their voices carrying across the nearly empty range. "She's going to wash out for sure," one of them said. "I give her another week, maybe 2 if they're being generous." Sarah pretended not to hear, but each word cut deep. She had always been determined and hard-working, traits that had carried her through college and her previous job as a social worker. But this challenge felt different, more personal somehow. The firearm represented everything she feared about not being tough enough, strong enough, or capable enough to protect others. Walking to her car that evening, Sarah made a decision that would change everything. She wasn't going to let fear and inexperience define her future. Tomorrow would be different, even if she had to stay after hours and practice until her hands bled. She had come too far to give up now, and the jeers of her classmates would only fuel her determination to prove them wrong. Sarah arrived at the range 30 minutes early the next morning, hoping to get some extra practice before the official session began. She found Sergeant Thompson already there, cleaning equipment and preparing targets. He looked up, surprised to see her so early. "Martinez, you're here early. Having trouble sleeping?" he asked, his tone softer than usual. "I need more practice, Sergeant. I know I'm behind everyone else, but I'm willing to put in extra time," Sarah replied, trying to keep the desperation out of her voice. Thompson studied her for a moment, then nodded toward the ammunition locker. "Grab a box of practice rounds. Let's see what we're working with." For the next 20 minutes, Thompson worked with Sarah one-on-one, adjusting her stance and grip. He noticed she was overthinking every shot, her muscles tense with anxiety. You're fighting the gun instead of working with it, he explained. Relax your shoulders, breathe naturally, and trust your training. When the other recruits arrived, Sarah's shooting had improved slightly, but she still struggled with consistency. Marcus Chen and his group of friends took their usual positions nearby, making no effort to hide their amusement at her continued difficulties. Maybe she should try a water gun first, Marcus whispered to his friend Jake, causing another round of snickers. During the qualification round that afternoon, Sarah managed to keep all her shots on the target, but her grouping was still well below academy standards. The minimum score was 70% hits in the center rings, and she barely achieved 40%. As the results were posted, she could feel the weight of disappointed stares from both instructors and fellow recruits. After class, Sarah lingered at the range, studying the targets of successful shooters. She noticed patterns in their shot placement and began to understand the subtle differences in technique that separated good shooters from poor ones. Officer Williams, a veteran who sometimes assisted with training, approached her as she analyzed the targets. I wasn't much better when I started, Officer Williams said quietly. Took me 6 months to qualify, and that was with daily practice. The difference between success and failure isn't natural talent. It's how badly you want it and how hard you're willing to work. That evening, Sarah did something she had never considered before. She drove to a civilian shooting range across town, paid for an hour of practice time, and spent her own money on ammunition. The range officer, an elderly man named Frank, noticed her academy uniform and offered some tips. Police training focuses on quick, accurate shooting under stress, Frank explained. But you need to master the basics first: breathing, trigger control, and follow-through. Speed comes later. Frank showed her breathing techniques used by competitive shooters, emphasizing the natural pause between exhale and inhale where the body is most stable. He also taught her about trigger squeeze, explaining how even the slightest jerk could send a bullet wide of the target. Sarah practiced until the range closed, her hands sore from gripping the pistol but her confidence slowly beginning to rebuild. When she returned to the academy the next day, her first few shots showed marked improvement. The grouping was tighter, and more shots found their way into the scoring rings. But improvement wasn't happening fast enough for some of her critics. During a break, she overheard Marcus telling another recruit, "They should just cut her loose now. She's going to get someone killed out there if she ever makes it to the streets." The comment stung because Sarah harbored the same fear. What if she wasn't good enough? What if her struggles with firearms indicated deeper inadequacies that would make her a liability as a police officer? The doubt crept in like poison, affecting not just her shooting, but her performance in other areas of training as well. Sergeant Thompson noticed the change in her overall demeanor during physical training that afternoon. Her usual determination seemed clouded by uncertainty, and her responses in tactical scenarios lacked the confidence she had shown in earlier weeks. "Martinez, stay after class," Thompson called out as the day ended. When the range emptied, Thompson sat across from Sarah on a bench, his expression serious but not unkind. "I've been training recruits for 2 decades, and I can tell when someone's letting outside voices get inside their head. You've got the heart for this job, but you're letting fear control your trigger finger." Sarah looked down at her hands, calloused now from hours of extra practice. "What if they're right, Sergeant? What if I'm just not cut out for this?" Thompson leaned back, considering his words carefully. "Every officer I've ever respected started with doubt. The ones who scare me are the ones who never questioned their abilities. Doubt keeps you humble, keeps you training, keeps you alive, but you can't let it paralyze you." As Sarah drove home that night, Thompson's words echoed in her mind. She thought about her father, about the victims he had helped throughout his career, and about her own reasons for wanting to serve. The jeers and whispers of her classmates began to fade, replaced by a growing resolve that surprised her with its intensity. The weekend brought Sarah's first real breakthrough. She spent both Saturday and Sunday at Frank's civilian range, working on the fundamentals with religious dedication. Frank had become an unofficial mentor, sharing techniques he had learned during his own military service decades earlier. "Shooting is like meditation," Frank explained as Sarah prepared for another round of practice. "Your mind has to be completely present, focused only on the task at hand. All those voices telling you what you can't do, they have no place here." Sarah began incorporating visualization techniques Frank taught her, imagining successful shots before pulling the trigger. She learned to recognize the rhythm of her heartbeat and time her shots for the natural pause between beats. Most importantly, she started to trust herself. Monday morning arrived with the weekly qualification test, a formal assessment that determined whether recruits would advance or face remedial training. Sarah felt different as she approached the firing line, calmer, more centered than she had been since arriving at the academy. The first string of fire went better than any previous attempt. Her shots formed a respectable group in the 7 and 8 rings, well within qualifying standards. She could hear whispers of surprise from nearby lanes, but they no longer carried the sting they once did. Marcus Chen glanced over at her target during a ceasefire, his smug expression faltering slightly. "Lucky round," he muttered, but there was less conviction in his voice than before. The second string proved it wasn't luck. Sarah's confidence grew with each trigger pull, her stance more natural, her breathing controlled. When the final commands were given and targets retrieved, she had achieved her first qualifying score, 72%, just 2 points above the minimum but a massive improvement from her previous attempts. Sergeant Thompson reviewed her target with barely concealed surprise. "Well, Martinez, looks like someone's been putting in extra work. This is more like it." The achievement felt monumental to Sarah, but she knew it was just the beginning. Qualifying once didn't guarantee future success, and she still needed to maintain this level of performance consistently while adding stress and time pressure to the equation. During lunch, the dynamic among the recruits shifted subtly. The constant jokes at Sarah's expense became less frequent, though Marcus and his group still maintained their skeptical attitude. A few recruits, particularly those who had struggled in other areas of training, began to see Sarah's improvement as proof that hard work could overcome initial disadvantages. Jennifer Walsh, a recruit who had been struggling with the academic portions of training, approached Sarah after the afternoon session. "I heard you've been practicing on your own time. Do you think that range you go to would help me with studying too? They have classrooms there, right?" Sarah smiled, realizing that her struggles had made her more approachable to others facing their own challenges. "It's just a shooting range, but I know some quiet coffee shops where we could study together if you want." The conversation marked Sarah's first real friendship at the academy. She had been so focused on her own struggles that she hadn't noticed others were facing different, but equally daunting challenges. Jennifer's gratitude reminded Sarah that everyone was fighting their own battles to become police officers. Over the following weeks, Sarah's shooting continued to improve steadily. She maintained her routine of extra practice at Frank's range, often joined now by Jennifer and occasionally by other recruits who had overcome their initial skepticism. The group became an informal support network, sharing study notes and encouragement. But success brought new challenges. As Sarah's marksmanship improved, the scenarios became more complex. They practiced shooting while moving, shooting from behind cover, and shooting in low-light conditions. Each new variable tested her newfound confidence and forced her to adapt her techniques. The first combat simulation was particularly challenging. Recruits had to navigate through a mock building, identifying threats and making split-second decisions about when to shoot. Sarah found herself overthinking again, her hard-won confidence shaken by the complexity and pressure of real-world scenarios. During one exercise, she hesitated too long before engaging a target that represented an armed suspect threatening a hostage. Sergeant Thompson's debrief was sharp and direct. "Martinez, all the accuracy in the world won't help if you can't make decisive choices under pressure. Police work isn't about perfect shots. It's about making the right decision quickly enough to save lives." That evening, Sarah called her father for the first time in weeks. She had been avoiding their conversations, afraid that her struggles would disappoint him. But now she needed his perspective on the psychological demands of police work. "Dad, how did you handle situations where you had to make life or death decisions quickly? I'm getting better at shooting, but I freeze up when there's pressure to act fast." Her father was quiet for a moment before responding. "Sweetheart, every good officer goes through that struggle. The technical skills are just tools. The real challenge is learning to trust your training and your instincts when everything is happening fast and lives are on the line." He shared stories from his early years, describing similar moments of doubt and hesitation that had nearly cost him his career. The difference between adequate officers and great ones isn't that great officers never doubt themselves. It's that they learn to act despite the doubt. Confidence comes from repetition and experience, not from the absence of fear. As Sarah hung up the phone, she realized that her journey was far from over. Mastering the basics of marksmanship had been just the first step in a much longer process of becoming the police officer she dreamed of being. The jeers of her classmates had pushed her to improve her shooting, but now she faced the even greater challenge of developing the judgment and decisiveness that effective policing required. The Academy's Stress Fire course was designed to simulate the chaos and pressure of real police encounters. Recruits had to run through obstacle courses, solve problems under time pressure, and then engage targets while their heart rates were elevated and adrenaline was coursing through their systems. Sarah approached the course with a mixture of determination and anxiety. Her static shooting had become consistently good, but she knew that performing under physical and mental stress would test everything she had learned. The other recruits gathered around the course entrance, some looking confident while others appeared as nervous as she felt. Marcus Chen was among the first to complete the course, finishing with a respectable score that earned nods of approval from the instructors. His cockiness had diminished somewhat since Sarah's improvement began, but he still carried himself with the swagger of someone who believed police work came naturally to him. When Sarah's turn came, she started strong. The physical obstacles felt manageable after weeks of conditioning, and she maintained good breathing control as she moved through the course. But when she reached the shooting portion, the elevated heart rate and time pressure combined to resurrect her old demons. Her first few shots went wide, missing the target entirely. The familiar panic began to set in, and she could hear the stopwatch ticking away precious seconds. For a moment, it felt like her first day at the range all over again. The weight of the gun felt foreign. Her hands shook and doubt clouded her judgment. Then Frank's voice echoed in her memory. "Your mind has to be completely present." Sarah forced herself to stop, take one deep breath, and focus solely on the front sight of her pistol. The world around her seemed to slow down as she applied everything she had learned about trigger control and follow-through. The remaining shots found their mark, not perfectly but well enough to achieve a passing score. It wasn't the smooth performance she had hoped for, but it represented progress in managing stress and recovering from initial mistakes. Sergeant Thompson's feedback was measured but encouraging. "Martinez, you showed something important today. When things went wrong, you didn't panic completely. You found a way to refocus and finish the course. That's the kind of mental toughness we need on the streets." The comment meant more to Sarah than any perfect score could have. She was beginning to understand that police work wasn't about flawless performance under ideal conditions. It was about maintaining effectiveness when everything was going wrong. Over the following weeks, the training scenarios became increasingly complex and realistic. They practiced responding to domestic violence calls, dealing with armed robberies, and handling traffic stops that escalated unexpectedly. Each scenario required not just accurate shooting, but sound judgment about when to draw their weapons and when to use them. Sarah found herself excelling in the decision-making aspects of these exercises. Her background in social work had given her skills in reading people and de-escalating tense situations that many of her classmates lacked. While they were quick to resort to force, she often found verbal solutions that resolved conflicts without gunfire. During one particularly challenging scenario involving a mentally ill person with a knife, Sarah successfully talked the actor playing the suspect into surrendering peacefully. Marcus and several other recruits had shot the suspect in their attempts at the same scenario, failing to recognize that the person was more confused than dangerous. "Martinez showed excellent judgment there," Sergeant Thompson announced to the class. "Sometimes the best shooting is no shooting at all. Police officers need to be warriors when necessary, but they also need to be counselors, mediators, and problem solvers." The praise felt different from her earlier achievements in marksmanship. This recognition was for skills that came naturally to her, abilities that had drawn her to police work in the first place. She began to see how her struggles with firearms had been just one component of a much broader skill set required for effective law enforcement. Jennifer Walsh approached her after class, grinning broadly. "Did you see Marcus's face when Thompson praised your judgment? I think he's finally starting to realize that being a good cop takes more than just being able to shoot straight." But Marcus wasn't ready to concede anything. During a break between exercises, he cornered Sarah near the equipment storage area. "Don't get too comfortable, Martinez. When we hit the streets, social work skills won't stop bullets. You can talk all you want, but when someone's shooting at you, you better hope your trigger finger is fast enough." His words carried an undercurrent of resentment that went beyond simple competitiveness. Sarah realized that her improvement and the recognition she was receiving for her judgment skills threatened Marcus's self-image as the natural leader of their recruit class. That evening, Sarah reflected on how much had changed since her first disastrous day at the range. She was no longer the recruit who couldn't hit a target, but she also wasn't trying to become someone she wasn't. Instead, she was learning to integrate her natural abilities with the technical skills required for police work. Frank noticed the change in her demeanor during their next practice session. "You're shooting like a different person," he observed. "More relaxed, more confident, but also more thoughtful about each shot." Sarah nodded, adjusting her stance for another round of practice. "I think I'm finally understanding that being a good police officer isn't about being the best at any one thing. It's about bringing together all your skills and using them when they're needed most." The realization marked a turning point in her academy experience. The jeers and doubts that had once motivated her through fear were being replaced by a deeper understanding of her own capabilities and the complex nature of police work. She was no longer just trying to prove her critics wrong. She was becoming the kind of officer she had always dreamed of being. The final month of academy training brought the most challenging scenarios yet. Recruits were tested on everything they had learned, often in situations that combined multiple skills simultaneously. Sarah found herself thriving in this environment. Her confidence now built on a solid foundation of both technical competence and practical experience. The capstone exercise was a comprehensive simulation that lasted an entire day. Recruits worked in pairs, responding to various calls throughout a mock city built on the academy grounds. They faced everything from routine traffic stops to active shooter scenarios, with instructors evaluating their performance on technical skills, decision-making, teamwork, and stress management. Sarah was paired with David Rodriguez, a quiet recruit who had consistently performed well throughout training, but struggled with confidence in high-pressure situations. Their first call was a domestic disturbance that required them to separate arguing parties and determine if any laws had been broken. Sarah took the lead in interviewing the involved parties, using her social work background to calm tensions and gather information. David handled the technical aspects, checking for warrants and documenting the incident properly. Their partnership worked smoothly, each playing to their strengths while supporting the other's areas of growth. The second scenario tested their shooting skills under pressure. They responded to a robbery in progress, arriving to find armed suspects holding hostages in a convenience store. The exercise required careful positioning, clear communication, and precise shooting to neutralize the threats without endangering innocent people. As they approached the building, Sarah felt the familiar surge of adrenaline that had once paralyzed her shooting ability, but now she recognized the feeling and had learned to channel it productively. She communicated her position to David, identified the clearest shot angle, and waited for the optimal moment to engage. When the scenario supervisor gave the signal that negotiations had failed and immediate action was required, Sarah's training took over. Her shots were controlled and accurate, neutralizing her assigned target while David successfully handled his. The hostages remained safe and the threat was eliminated efficiently. "Excellent work, both of you," the evaluating instructor announced. "Martinez, your shooting was textbook perfect. But more importantly, your patience and judgment prevented the situation from becoming a tragedy. Rodriguez, your tactical positioning and communication kept everyone safe." As they moved to the next scenario, David looked at Sarah with genuine admiration. "I can't believe you were struggling with shooting just a few months ago. You handled that like a veteran." Sarah smiled, remembering the fear and frustration of those early days. "I had a lot of help and I learned that struggling doesn't mean failing. It just means you have to work harder and be more creative in finding solutions." The afternoon brought their most challenging scenario yet, an active shooter in a school setting. This exercise tested every aspect of their training: rapid response, building clearance, suspect apprehension, and victim assistance. The emotional weight of the scenario, even in simulation, affected every recruit who participated. Sarah and David entered the building systematically, clearing rooms and moving toward the sound of simulated gunfire. They encountered several wounded actors playing students and teachers, requiring them to balance the urgency of stopping the threat with the need to provide aid to victims. When they finally confronted the shooter, Sarah found herself in a situation that months earlier would have overwhelmed her completely. The actor was holding a replica weapon and appeared to be experiencing a mental health crisis, alternating between aggression and confusion. Instead of immediately resorting to force, Sarah attempted to communicate with the person, recognizing signs of psychological distress that might respond to de-escalation rather than violence. She kept her weapon ready but tried verbal intervention first, drawing on her understanding of crisis psychology. The shooter eventually surrendered peacefully, allowing Sarah and David to secure the scene and begin coordinating with other response teams. The successful resolution without additional violence earned praise from multiple instructors who had been observing the exercise. Sergeant Thompson pulled Sarah aside as they finished the scenario. "Martinez, what you did in there was exceptional. You recognized that the situation might have a solution beyond shooting, and you had the skills and confidence to attempt it. That's the kind of judgment that saves lives." But not everyone was impressed with Sarah's approach. Marcus Chen, who had been observing from a command post during the exercise, cornered her during the debrief session. "You took a huge risk in there, Martinez. What if that guy had been faking the mental health thing? You could have gotten yourself and Rodriguez killed by hesitating," he argued, his voice carrying the frustration of someone whose worldview was being challenged. Sarah considered his words carefully before responding. "You're right that there was risk involved, but there's also risk in shooting someone who might not need to be shot. Police work is about managing risks and making the best decision possible with incomplete information." The exchange highlighted a fundamental difference in their approaches to law enforcement. Marcus saw the job primarily in terms of force and control, while Sarah was developing a more nuanced understanding that included empathy and judgment as essential tools. As the final evaluations were compiled, Sarah realized that her journey from struggling recruit to confident officer in training had taught her something valuable about resilience and growth. The jeers and doubts that had once seemed like insurmountable obstacles had actually become the motivation for developing skills she never knew she possessed. That evening, she called Frank to thank him for his help throughout her training. "I don't think I could have made it through without your guidance and the extra practice time," Frank chuckled over the phone. "You had everything you needed inside you already, Sarah. You just needed to believe in yourself enough to let it come out." The shooting was just the beginning. The real test comes when you're on the streets helping people. As Sarah prepared for graduation from the academy, she felt a deep sense of accomplishment that went far beyond simply learning to shoot accurately. She had discovered her own capacity for growth, developed confidence in her judgment, and learned to integrate her natural talents with newly acquired technical skills. The criticism that had once threatened to derail her dreams had ultimately made her a better, more well-rounded officer. Graduation day at the police academy arrived with a mixture of ceremony and nervous anticipation. Family members filled the auditorium as recruits prepared to take their oath of office and receive their badges. Sarah's father sat in the front row, his eyes bright with pride as he watched his daughter prepare to follow in his footsteps. The final rankings were announced during the ceremony, recognizing excellence in various categories. Marcus Chen received the award for highest overall academic performance, while David Rodriguez was recognized for outstanding improvement in physical fitness. When Sarah's name was called for the award recognizing excellence in judgment and crisis resolution, the applause was particularly warm. Officer Martinez demonstrated throughout her training that effective policing requires more than technical skills, Chief Williams announced as Sarah stepped forward to receive her recognition. Her ability to resolve conflicts through communication and her sound decision-making under pressure exemplify the kind of officer our community needs. As Sarah shook hands with the chief and accepted her certificate, she caught sight of Marcus in her peripheral vision. His expression was unreadable, but she noticed him clapping along with the rest of the audience. Perhaps he was beginning to understand that there were many ways to excel in law enforcement. After the ceremony, family members gathered with the new officers for photos and congratulations. Sarah's father embraced her with tears in his eyes, remembering his own graduation decades earlier. "I'm so proud of you, sweetheart," You've overcome every challenge and proven that determination and character matter more than natural talent, he said, his voice thick with emotion. Frank had also come to the graduation, bringing with him a small gift, a custom-engraved challenge coin commemorating Sarah's journey from struggling recruit to accomplished officer. This represents all the hours of practice and the courage to keep trying when things seemed impossible, he explained. But the real test was just beginning. Academy training provided a controlled environment where mistakes were learning opportunities rather than life-threatening disasters. The streets would present challenges that no simulation could fully prepare them for, requiring split-second decisions with real consequences. Sarah's first assignment was to the downtown precinct, working the evening shift under the supervision of Officer Patricia Chen, a 15-year veteran known for her mentoring skills and practical wisdom. Patricia had requested Sarah as her trainee after reviewing her academy performance, particularly impressed by her crisis resolution abilities. Academy training gives you the foundation, but real police work is learned one call at a time, Patricia explained as they began their first patrol together. You'll make mistakes, we all do, but the key is learning from them and never letting them compromise your safety or the safety of others. Their first call was a noise complaint at an apartment complex, the kind of routine assignment that experienced officers handle without much thought. But as they approached the building, Sarah could hear shouting and what sounded like breaking glass coming from one of the units. When they knocked on the door, they were greeted by a clearly intoxicated man who immediately became belligerent upon seeing their uniforms. Behind him, Sarah could see a woman holding a small child, both looking frightened and showing signs of recent injuries. The situation required delicate handling. The man was large and aggressive, but the presence of the child meant that any use of force had to be carefully considered. Sarah found herself drawing on both her academy training and her social work background as she tried to de-escalate the situation. "Sir, we're here because neighbors were concerned about noise. Is everyone okay in here?" Sarah asked, keeping her voice calm and non-threatening while positioning herself where she could see all parties involved. The man began ranting about his rights and demanding that they leave. But Sarah noticed that the woman behind him was trying to communicate something through facial expressions and subtle gestures. Years of working with domestic violence victims had taught her to read these nonverbal cues. Patricia remained ready to provide backup, while allowing Sarah to take the lead in handling the situation. This was exactly the kind of scenario where Sarah's particular skills could make the difference. Between a peaceful resolution and a violent confrontation, through patient questioning and careful observation, Sarah determined that the man had been drinking heavily and had become physically aggressive with his girlfriend. The woman was too frightened to speak openly, but her injuries and behavior clearly indicated domestic violence. "I understand this is your home, and I respect that," Sarah told the man, continuing to maintain a calm demeanor, even as she prepared for the possibility that the situation could escalate quickly. "But I can see that someone here might be hurt, and it's my job to make sure everyone is safe." The man's anger seemed to intensify, and he took a step towards Sarah in a threatening manner. This was the moment when her academy training in threat assessment and escalation of force became crucial. She had to decide whether verbal de-escalation was still possible, or if physical intervention was necessary to protect herself and the victims. Patricia tensed, ready to assist, but she trusted Sarah's judgment enough to let her continue handling the situation. In that moment, months of training, practice, and self-doubt crystallized into a clear understanding of what needed to be done. Sarah's response would determine not only the outcome of this particular call, but also set the tone for her entire career as a police officer. The jeers and criticism from her academy days seemed like distant memories now, replaced by the immediate reality of making decisions that could save or endanger lives. Everything she had learned, from marksmanship to crisis psychology, from legal procedures to tactical awareness, converged in this single moment of truth. The frightened woman and child behind the aggressive man represented exactly why she had wanted to become a police officer in the first place, and now she had the skills and confidence necessary to help them. Sarah maintained her calm demeanor as the man stepped closer, recognizing the signs of someone whose judgment was impaired by alcohol, but who might still respond to the right approach. She had learned that aggressive behavior often masked fear or pain, and her experience suggested this man was struggling with issues beyond just the immediate situation. "I can see you're upset, and I understand why having police at your door might feel threatening," Sarah said, neither advancing nor retreating but maintaining a ready stance. "But I'm here to help everyone in this situation, including you. Can you tell me what's been happening tonight?" The man paused, seemingly surprised by her non-confrontational approach. Behind him, the woman took advantage of his momentary distraction to move slightly closer to the door with her child. Sarah noticed the movement and subtly positioned herself to provide a clear exit path if needed. "You don't understand anything," the man finally said, his voice carrying more pain than anger now. "I lost my job last week and everything's falling apart. I just need everyone to leave me alone." Sarah recognized the opening she had been looking for. This wasn't just about domestic violence, it was about a man whose life was spiraling out of control and who was using alcohol and aggression to cope with feelings of helplessness and failure. "Losing a job is incredibly stressful," Sarah acknowledged, her voice carrying genuine empathy. "And I can see you care about your family. But right now, I'm worried that someone might get hurt if we don't find a way to calm things down." Patricia watched with growing admiration as Sarah navigated the delicate balance between empathy and authority. This was exactly the kind of policing that built community trust while keeping everyone safe. Over the next 20 minutes, Sarah gradually convinced the man to sit down and talk about his problems. She learned that he had been a construction worker for 12 years before being laid off due to budget cuts. The stress of unemployment, combined with his fear of losing his family's apartment, had driven him to drink more heavily than usual. The woman, whose name was Maria, finally felt safe enough to speak when her boyfriend was calm. She confirmed that he had never been violent before tonight, but admitted that his drinking had been getting worse since he lost his job. The injuries were minor, a bruised arm from when he had grabbed her too roughly during an argument. Rather than making arrests that would have destroyed an already fragile family situation, Sarah worked with Patricia to connect them with social services, job placement assistance, and alcohol counseling resources. They also ensured that Maria had contact information for domestic violence support services in case the situation escalated in the future. "You handled that beautifully," Patricia told Sarah as they returned to their patrol car. "You could have arrested him for domestic battery and been completely justified, but you found a solution that addressed the real problem. That's the difference between good policing and great policing." Word of Sarah's performance spread quickly through the precinct. Within her first month on the job, she had successfully de-escalated several potentially violent situations and earned the respect of both her colleagues and the community members she served. Her shooting skills, once a source of embarrassment, had become reliable and confident through continued practice. 3 months into her career, Sarah received a call that would test everything she had learned. A man armed with a knife was threatening patrons at a downtown restaurant, claiming he had nothing left to lose and demanding that police just end it for him. The situation was a textbook example of suicide by cop, where a disturbed individual tries to force police to kill them. Sarah arrived as backup to the initial responding officers, but the primary negotiator was having difficulty establishing communication with the subject. The man was highly agitated, waving the knife dangerously close to terrified customers who were trapped in the restaurant. "Martinez, you've got good instincts with crisis situations," Sergeant Williams said over the radio. "Can you try to make contact?" Sarah approached the restaurant carefully, her weapon drawn but pointed down in a non-threatening position. Through the window, she could see a middle-aged man who appeared to be in severe emotional distress. The knife in his hand shook as he shouted at the other officers to shoot him. "Sir, my name is Sarah, and I'm here to listen," she called out, her voice carrying clearly through the broken glass of the restaurant's front door. "I can see you're in a lot of pain right now, and I want to help you find a way through this." The man turned toward her voice, his eyes wild with desperation and grief. "You can't help me." "Nobody can. I lost everything, my wife, my kids, my house." "There's nothing left." Sarah recognized the depth of his despair and realized that traditional police commands would only escalate his desire for self-destruction. Instead, she drew on her understanding of crisis psychology and her own experience with overcoming seemingly impossible challenges. "I hear you saying that everything feels hopeless right now," Sarah responded, taking a small step closer while keeping her hands visible. But I also hear someone who loved his family deeply and is struggling with incredible loss. That kind of love doesn't just disappear, even when everything else feels broken. For the next hour, Sarah maintained a dialogue with the man, learning that his wife had died in a car accident 6 months earlier, and that his children blamed him for the financial problems that followed. His grief had consumed him completely, leaving him unable to see any path forward. Gradually, Sarah helped him understand that his death would only add to his children's trauma and grief. She talked about her own struggles with feeling inadequate and how she had learned that perceived failures didn't define a person's worth or potential for recovery. When the man finally dropped the knife and allowed officers to approach him safely, there wasn't a single person at the scene who doubted Sarah's abilities. The same skills that had once made her struggle with firearms, her empathy, her patience, her ability to see beyond surface behaviors to underlying pain, had saved multiple lives. As paramedics took the man to receive mental health treatment, Sergeant Williams approached Sarah with evident pride. "Officer Martinez, what you did today was extraordinary. You turned a potential tragedy into a rescue mission." 6 months later, Sarah received a letter from the man she had talked down from the restaurant. He was in counseling, had reconciled with his children, and was slowly rebuilding his life. "You saw something in me that I couldn't see in myself," he wrote. "You reminded me that even broken people can heal if they're willing to try." Marcus Chen, who had been promoted to detective, approached Sarah in the precinct parking lot that same week. "Martinez, I owe you an apology," he said, his usual arrogance replaced by genuine humility. "I was wrong about what makes a good cop. You've shown all of us that there are different ways to serve and protect." Sarah smiled, remembering the fear and doubt that had plagued her during those early days at the academy. "We all have different strengths, Marcus. The important thing is learning how to use them to help people." As she drove home that evening, Sarah reflected on the journey that had brought her from a struggling recruit who couldn't hit a target to an officer whose colleagues sought her advice on difficult cases. The jeers and criticism that had once threatened to end her dream had ultimately made her stronger and more determined. Her father called as she pulled into her driveway, as he did every week to check on her progress. "How are things going, sweetheart? Any interesting cases this week?" Sarah laughed, thinking about all the lives she had touched and the difference she was making in her community. "Dad, I think I'm finally becoming the kind of police officer I always dreamed of being. It just took me a while to understand that being different doesn't mean being inferior." The conversation reminded her that success wasn't about proving critics wrong or meeting other people's expectations. It was about staying true to her own values while developing the skills necessary to serve others effectively. The girl who had once trembled while holding a pistol had grown into a confident officer whose greatest weapon was her ability to see the humanity in every person she encountered.